What I did when I discovered my CEO committing fraud. At one of my first jobs in the US, the company executives were on the take. In late 1990, I was hired as the chief financial officer of a small publicly traded company engaged in selling specialty gift products. It was an indication that the American business world had accepted me, a recent immigrant to the United States. I quickly settled into the job and looked forward to helping build this small public company into a consumer products powerhouse. Shortly after I joined the firm, I met a guy in the sales department. His name was Stephan. One day, Stephan came into my office, closed the door, and said he would like to speak with me. I said sure. He then told me he was convinced the chief executive officer and the president of the company were stealing money. Stephan said that he was a sales guy and didn't know how to prove it, but he was sure that I, a finance and accounting guy, could figure it out. Even though this company was small, it did have both a CEO and a president, and the two of them were in effect the management team behind the company. I was skeptical. The company was publicly traded and audited. Surely if there was anything out of the ordinary, the audit would have caught it. However, I figured it wouldn't hurt to have a look. At that time, banks would send a business their canceled checks that had been cashed, and most companies would keep those canceled checks for reference. I started by pulling out a stack of canceled checks from some period prior to me joining the firm and started to go through them. It didn't take me long to find a few checks that looked suspicious. There was a series of checks made out to cash. It is unusual for business checks to be made out to cash. I discovered that these checks were being coded into the books as payments to supplier invoices, fake invoices as it turned out, and that the president was taking these checks to the bank and getting cashier's checks made out to pay for everything from a new car for his daughter to payments against his mortgage. Based on something Stephan told me, I also investigated our commission agents. We sold most of our products through commission agents, and one of our largest commissioned agents sold to a couple of the major big box retailers. We paid this company hundreds of thousands a year in commissions. I did an inquiry with the California Secretary of State and discovered that the president of the company that generated a large part of our sales was the 7-year-old son of the company's chief executive officer. This company was a fake company designed to funnel funds to the president and CEO. At the time, the company's major manufacturer of product was in China, and we had an agent in Hong Kong who managed the relationship for us. Either the CEO or the president went to Hong Kong to visit him every month. One day, I was in the president's office just after he returned from Hong Kong, and I noticed an envelope on his desk with $9,900 written on the envelope. Knowing that if you bring in more than $10,000 in cash into the country from abroad, you must declare, I thought that he might be bringing cash in illegally. Later, I was able to find a ledger in which he had recorded cash payments given to him from the Hong Kong agent, including a record as to how that money was split between him and the CEO. Over the course of about a couple of months, I researched everything I could. The sales guy and I even made a midnight visit to the company's offices looking for evidence in the CEO's and president's office and filing cabinets. In addition to the 3 frauds listed above, I discovered a number of other schemes to steal money from the company. Armed with this information, I contacted a colleague of mine whose primary job was working as a SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission attorney. Each time I showed him what I had discovered, he wanted more. I kept researching. Finally, I had enough evidence to satisfy my attorney friend. In total, the theft that I could conclusively prove amounted to more than $6 million. I discussed the situation with friends and colleagues. Most advised me to polish up my resume, find another job, and do nothing. That didn't sit right with me. These executives were breaking the law and defrauding the stockholders. I made the decision to take the matter to the authorities. Armed with a 3-inch binder full of evidence with descriptions on how the thefts were orchestrated, I started calling law enforcement. The business was in the city of Los Angeles. The LA police had no interest in the case. I called the FBI, and they showed no interest in the case either. Finally, my attorney friend suggested I contact the SEC, which I did. A few weeks later, I met with a couple of people at the SEC's office on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles and showed them the evidence. Then the SEC had me in for a formal interview where they asked questions and had me explain the fraud. That session was recorded with a court reporter. Upon completion, the SEC agents told me I had to inform the company's board of directors. There was one problem. The company's board of directors was comprised of 5 people: the CEO, the president, the agent from Hong Kong, a prominent Orange County investment banker, and me. In a straight-up vote, I thought it would be 3-2, in which case the crooks would stay in power. I would lose my job. The first thing I did was make an appointment to meet with the investment banker. When I showed him the evidence, he explained it this way: these guys are not used to running public companies. I'm sure this is all just them not understanding the rules. Let's just talk to them and get them to pay the money back over time. It's a good thing I had already talked to the SEC. When I told the investment banker that I'd talked to the SEC, he went pale and called in his assistant. He shouted at her, "Cancel all my appointments and get me my attorneys on the phone now." The investment banker's attorneys are a very well-known law firm and one of the top law firms in the world in revenue. The company also had its own one-man show attorney. I called him and explained what was happening. Over the course of the next few weeks, we had several meetings. Our attorney, the investment banker's attorneys, I used the plural because they brought 2 or 3 attorneys to every meeting. Me, the investment banker, and the sales guy who had brought me his suspicions at the beginning. The investment banker's attorneys had all sorts of ideas, but each seemed impractical or unlikely to work. Finally, the company's one-man show produced an idea. Have the investment banker call a board meeting, and just prior to the board meeting, the sales guy would fly to Hong Kong and confront the agent with the evidence, including informing him that the whole thing had been reported to the SEC. That is exactly what we did. I was in the company's board meeting with the CEO, the president, the investment banker, and our attorney, and we had the agent from Hong Kong on the phone. Just before the meeting convened, the sale guy confronted the agent and showed him the evidence. He then got on the phone. The board meeting was called to order and a motion made to remove the CEO and president from office. The investment banker, and the agent voted in favor. The CEO and the president voted against it. So, with that board meeting, they were effectively booted out of the company. As he left the board meeting, the CEO wagged his finger, glared at me, and said, "Manahan, you are a dead man. I am a member of the Jewish mafia." They both walked out of the building and took off in their cars. Concerned about his threat, I immediately engaged the services of an armed guard. It is a good thing I did, because sometime later they pulled up with a truck and started hauling boxes out of their offices and loading them into the truck, obviously trying to hide the evidence. I had the armed guard stop them, and that was the last time I ever saw them. I had the armed guard outside my office door for about 3 months, and then decided the threat was minimal and got rid of him. The SEC, through the Department of Justice, using the evidence I had presented, charged the CEO and the president with fraud, tax evasion, and, as I recall, several other crimes. In a plea deal, the crooks pled guilty. They spent a couple of years in a minimum security prison, paid a small fine, and were barred from ever being officers or directors of a publicly traded company again. With the CEO and the president gone, the investment banker started to call the shots. He had raised the money in the public markets for the company in the first place. The sales guy and I proposed several different ideas and strategies as to how we would run the business, but the investment banker insisted we bring in a Top Gun executive to run the company, and he had the backing of a few major investors in the company. So, we hired a former Mattel executive. The guy came with all the bluster and bravado of a senior executive of one of the largest consumer products companies in the world. However, he may have been able to sell Barbies to Walmart and Target. He couldn't sell most of the products he created to anyone, and over the course of the next few years, he drained the bank account on a series of failed product ideas. I left the company and went off to bigger and better things. The company ran out of cash. The Mattel guy got a job somewhere else, and the business disappeared. When I tell this story, people often ask me, "Would you do it again?" I would. I did it at the time, and in retrospect, it just seemed the right thing to do. I never saw or heard of the 2 crooks after these events, but some years later, I did run into the investment banker at a conference in Newport Beach. He was standing in line, and I approached him and reached out to shake his hand. He looked at me and said, "Manahan, you're the asshole who nearly had me thrown in jail." As you might imagine, it was not the reunion I had expected. I should also mention that I received no reward or even, as I recall, any formal thank you from the government agencies for bringing these criminals to justice. Later, I would have my own issues with the SEC, but that's another story.